Glad to be here for the Human Rights Day event of Global Democracy Coalition. I'd like to present a summary of the human rights situation in Vietnam. Ladies and gentlemen, after complete control of Vietnam on April 30th, 1975, the authority of the Socialist Republic of Vietnam has imposed a totalitarian dictatorship in Vietnam until present day. Vietnam today is a one-party state ruled by the Vietnamese Communist Party. The National Assembly and Government of Socialist Republic of Vietnam are pre-appointed by the Communist Party in a sham election. People do not have the right to freely run for office and vote for candidates of their choice. The people are deprived of their basic freedoms, like the freedoms of speech, freedom of express, freedom of expression, freedom of association, religious freedom, etc. The judicial system is completely controlled by the party, the Communist Party. Cases are tried arbitrarily and unfairly without international standard. And the results are determined by the ruling party. Lawyers are threatened, persecuted, and prevented from doing their job. Currently, there are about over 300 prisoners of conscience being unjustly detained in Vietnam. Many arrests, detention, and trial of journalists, bloggers, writers, dignitaries, and religious followers are unjust, arbitrary, and not according to international standards. The world has condemned many death penalty cases for lack of transparency. The authorities have turned a blind eye to the party officials, colluding with each other, openly engaging in corruption, taking bribes, abusing and plundering public assets. They confiscate property and land from religious groups after 1975 and did not allow the reopening of all repair of a religious school, academy, monastery, and chair agency. The authority ignored the complaint of the victim who have had their land stolen, property confiscated, and themselves unjustly arrested and unfairly sentenced. The Vietnamese authority are consistently disregard the condemnation and recommendation of international human rights agency and organization and government of free country regarding the serious human rights violation. And there are many other human rights abuse in Vietnam now. For Vietnam, as well as for many parts of Asia, a sustainable civic space is a religious space. To have a resilient religious community, to protect civic space, and to protect human rights. Vietnam needs to release all journalists, political dissidents, and religious prisoners. The judicial system, which unjustly imprison people, religious prisoners include, need to be independent and consistent with international standards. The Vietnamese authority must return on religious property that were confiscated. Above all, Vietnam needs to comply with the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights and International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, especially the freedom of religion and belief, freedom of press, and free election. Thank you very much for your listening, and wish you have a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
for the introduction. 75 years ago, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was born in the aftermath of World War II. It embodies human beings' most cherished principles and aspirations. But for the people represented at this panel, this is no joyous anniversary. Over the full life of the Declaration, the loss and the suffering at the hands of the Asian autocratic regimes, particularly of the CCP, has been unspeakable. But the people from all the groups have never stopped struggling for the goals enshrined in the Declaration and have taken important steps toward these goals in this generation. 1 year ago, the people of China staged a massive protest, which collectively known as the White Paper Movement, was the first nationwide push for freedom in China since the 1989 Tiananmen massacre. As it went on, I wrote in the Washington Post arguing that 4 conditions must be met to have any chance of achieving meaningful change in China. First, the people must be deeply dissatisfied with the political status quo. Second, a democratic opposition must emerge and flourish. Third, a leadership rift must occur within the regime. Fourth, the international community must believe that the democratic opposition is viable and be willing to provide unwavering support for conditions. Over the past year, Condition 1 has gone deeper and broader, nurturing new possibilities for other 3 conditions. The White Paper Movement severely eroded the political and moral authority of Xi Jinping. Fear and reverence for him has waned, and protests against the CCP policies have become more frequent in China. Meanwhile, economic challenges have persisted even after the pandemic subsided. As China's economy struggles, one thing is certain: China's glorious era of rapid economic growth is over. This fact will have major repercussions for China. Remember in 1989, the Tiananmen massacre almost completely undermined the legitimacy of CCP's rule. However, the CCP managed to stabilize and even strengthen its position by relying on 3 pillars. 3 pillars. One is repressive rule. Second, rapid economic development. And the third, nationalism. Of these, rapid economic development played the most important role. The legitimacy derived from the rapid economic growth can be seen from another perspective. Amid the widespread fear and cynicism that followed the Tiananmen massacre, a tacit bargain was struck between the people, especially the elite, and the CCP regime. The bargain is freedom in exchange for prosperity and security. Today, that deal is unraveling. The era of trading freedom for prosperity and security is no longer tenable. This is a significant development, but it remains to be seen how the turning away elite will gain political influence and unite with the existing social movement to form an opposition coalition. That is condition 2 I mentioned earlier. If conditions 1 and 2 are bolstered by growing rift between the CCP and the economic elite, conditional 3, that is cracked within the regime, would be fulfilled. 2 scenarios in particular could increase this possibility. First, economic elites' growing wariness of Xi's regime is adversely affecting CCP's interests. decades of under-the-table deals have created an intricate web of relationship between the Chinese economic elite and government officials from top to bottom. Second, it seems inevitable that Xi Jinping will continue to make serious policy blunders, thus generating widespread public discontent and opportunities of cracking within the regime. Finally, conditional 4, the international support. The US-led democratic world must work to nurture conditions 2 and 3. Western governments should strive to advance China's human rights and cultivate a political independent middle class. The West must continue to support political prisoners and fight for their freedom. Finally, the democratic world can help by opposing Xi Jinping's global agenda. After all, any gains that the CCP makes on the global stage will only increase the scale and the scope of its authoritarianism at home. Thank you.
So as what Lynn said, I am from the Council of Asian Liberals and Democrats, which coincidentally celebrated our 30th anniversary yesterday. So we were founded 30 years ago on International Human Rights Day. And some of our key founders included Dr. Sorin Pitsuwan, the late Dr. Sorin Pitsuwan, former South Korean President Kim Dae-jung, and also former Prime Minister Chouwan Litpai of Thailand. So we're a network of political parties in Asia. So at the moment, there are 10 members. Most of these members are from Southeast Asia, but we also have members from Central and East Asia. I was asked in particular to discuss how can we foster a resilient, open, civic space in the region. So I would like to say that in order to do this, we need to recognize 3 realities: contextual, organizational, and strategic. So with regard to the contextual reality in Asia, I have to say that democracy, and by extension human rights, is not very popular in Asia. And this, I think, reflects the global trend that we have been observing in the past decades. There was a study conducted by Cambridge University which tracked the people's satisfaction with democracy from 1995 to 2020, and that study found out that more than 50% of the population were dissatisfied with democracy. A recent survey by the Pew Research Center also stated that people are dissatisfied with how democracy is working. And in Asia, I have to say that people are really discontented with democracy, and by extension, human rights. We have to recognize that in Asia, particularly East and Southeast Asia, and maybe Southeast Asia in particular, democracy has never been strong to begin with. So out of the 10 countries which are members of the Southeast Asian nation, none can be considered a full democracy. So the most democratic of the countries in Southeast Asia, which include the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, these countries are classified as flawed democracy by Freedom House. And of course, the rest are authoritarian, including Vietnam, Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia. And we have also hybrid systems like Singapore. So democracy has never been strong in our part of the world. And as I noted, there is growing dissatisfaction about democracy among the general population. So in Southeast Asia as well, we have to recognize that the gap between the rich and the poor are increasing. So this gap between rich and poor, people blame that to democracy as well. We also have to recognize, to make things more complicated, China, which is the big elephant in the room, has been actively promoting its own narrative about democracy. China described itself as a whole process people's democracy. And they were saying, the Chinese authorities are saying that this is democracy that works, that delivers the economic goods for the people. So we need to actively counter the narrative if we want to really expand civic space in the region, because China is using all the resources at its disposal, foreign aid, loans. They have academic exchange programs. They are inviting people to come to China, media people, civil society organizations, political parties, all expenses paid, in order to promote their narrative that China is a democracy that works. So I think we need to recognize that contextual reality. The second reality that we have to recognize as civil society actors is that we need to improve our capacity to advance democracy and human rights in the region. I was in Thailand 3 weeks ago to participate in the Asia Democracy Network, which is touted as the biggest gathering of civil society actors with more than 200 participants from across Asia. And one key takeaway that I have from that particular gathering is that if we try to advocate for everything, it usually results in nothing. So we need to concentrate, we need to focus our advocacies, we need to work on issues which are cross-cutting among different actors. And I think one example that we can cite was when Thailand attempted to pass an NGO law, an NGO registration law way back in 2021. So essentially this law asks all non-governmental organizations in Thailand to register with the Ministry of Interior, and if they don't register, they would pay significant penalties and even a 5-year prison time. So given the implications of this particular law, the civil society organizations in Thailand, they work with one another, they contacted their international counterparts. I think they even worked with the ICNL, which is based here in Washington, to look into the provisions of this law, and then they pass their recommendations to the Human Rights Council when the when Thailand was up for its Universal Periodic Review, they contacted embassies in Thailand so that they can also convince their government to stop this particular piece of legislation. And it was a successful case when we focus our advocacy on issues where a number of actors can work together. We also need to develop our capacity as civil society actors to communicate our advocacies in a way that resonate with the people. I mean, of course, we are very passionate about our respective advocacies, whether it is climate change, human rights, democracy promotion, etc. But we also need to recognize that people do not really relate to these issues. We need to somehow change the narrative so that we can relate our advocacies to issues which are closer to the stomach, so to speak, bread and butter issues that can resonate with the people. I think an example of this in my organization.
Director of the Hong Kong Democracy Council, HKDC, a leading nonpartisan nonprofit organization for Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement and Hong Kongers in the United States. Please welcome Miss Anna Kwok.
Thank you. First off, I want to thank the organizers for inviting me here today. I think it's really important that we're having this conversation today as we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But as my fellow panelists have said, this day is definitely not a day of particular joy for a lot of us. Because even though there's this Universal Declaration already in place for 75 years, what we're seeing in the past decades is honestly a deterioration of human rights in different parts of the world, and including in Hong Kong, my home city, where I had to leave for I don't know how long a few years ago. So today I was asked to talk about the situation, human rights situation in Hong Kong, but I do want to share the human rights situation not only in Hong Kong but also to Hong Kongers around the world, and also the human rights atrocities that the Chinese government has been causing to people around the world. So firstly, for the situation back in Hong Kong, it's been 4 years after the 2019 pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong. I'm sure some of you would have remembered, the videos and footages of millions of Hong Kongers marching on the streets of Hong Kong, surrounded by skyscrapers and things like that. But today, we no longer see that scene, and that's precisely because of the political repression that has been happening. As of the beginning of December, Hong Kong right now has 1,753 political prisoners, and that only happened within 4 years amount of time. So at the Hong Kong Democracy Council, we did try to do a research report tracking all these cases of political arrests. And what we have seen is that this data of the rise of political prisoners in Hong Kong is actually akin to countries like Belarus and Burma. But imagine Hong Kong being this international financial city, still recognized by a lot of international businesses and corporate owners as this Asia financial hub. It's quite difficult to imagine a city like that is seeing people getting thrown into jail just for sharing a post on Facebook. And yesterday, it was actually the district council elections in Hong Kong. Now, the Hong Kong government will tell you Hong Kongers still have freedom. They can still, stand for election or vote an election. But that is completely not true, because yesterday in the district council election, only patriots were allowed to stand an election. And what that means was, for all these people who wanted to run for office, they would have to pledge that they're loyal to the Chinese government and the Hong Kong government, and they also respect the national security law that was implemented in 2020 in Hong Kong. So right now, even though the Hong Kong government is still trying to provide this facade of what is known as an autonomy to the outside world, it is quite the contrary inside. And of course, with the political prisoners, with the homogenized political scene, in Hong Kong we also don't have media freedom anymore. So Jimmy Lai, the founder of the Apple Daily, who's the media tycoon in Hong Kong for years, he's now in jail and he's still waiting for his sentencing. A lot of us are actually expecting that he would spend the rest of his life in jail, and that is still something we cannot even imagine happening in Hong Kong right now. And we have also completely lost the judiciary system that we were once so proud of. So Hong Kong, being this previous British colony, actually signed. There was actually a joint declaration between the British government and the Chinese government that Hong Kong would and should enjoy 50 years of autonomy, and that is protected by the basic law and the judiciary system that we were supposed to have. But since the passing of the national security law in 2020, all that has changed. The judicial system is now weaponized to use against Hong Kongers who want to voice, their freedom and their expression for freedom. And now, whatever you say, as long as the government considers it to hinder national security, they can throw you into jail and they can charge you with a sentencing, of like 5 years, 10 years, or even more. So this is the state in Hong Kong right now. But when we look at it, sometimes a lot of people would only think of the human rights situation inside of Hong Kong, because we have always imagined this kind of authoritarian regime to be governing locally. But I think in the case of Hong Kong and also in recent developments around Asia, we see that that is not true. So in July, a few months ago, I woke up one day with the news that the Hong Kong government has put out an arrest warrant for my arrest, with a 1 million Hong Kong dollar bounty on my head. So if anyone, catches me on the streets of the United States and bring me onto a plane to send me back to China or Hong Kong, or even send me to the Chinese consulate and embassy here in the United States, they would be awarded with 1 million Hong Kong dollar, and that would also mean transnational repression is happening. And so we are seeing this trend of both the Hong Kong government and the Chinese government increasingly using tactics like this to rile up nationalists who are patriotic to the Chinese Communist Party, and riling up, bounty hunters to catch people like me. But everything I have done, everything I've done was based in the US. Everything they're charging me for is upon work that I've done in the United States, whether it's talking to Congress members, talking to the administration. Everything was done in the United States outside of Hong Kong, but yet they're changing the judicial system in Hong Kong and weaponizing the law so that they can also put people who are outside of Hong Kong as guilty. And that is the state of affairs a lot of us have been facing right now. So with the transnational repression happening, sadly, it's actually not only happening to Hong Kongers, but also to a lot of Americans and the international community around the world. For example, last month, we were in San Francisco. Actually, David was there as well. We were just talking about that. There was the APEC meeting, and of course the bilateral talk between President Biden and Xi in San Francisco. And we were protesting outside of where Xi was staying at, or where he was having his event, or that business dinner he had with Elon Musk and all these business leaders. And during these protests, we would encounter violence and harassment from pro-Beijing protesters. Well, now we cannot establish there's a direct link of them being paid by the Chinese government to protest or do anything like that. But we know for sure that they have a sense of nationalism in them, that they think they have, this mission to destroy and repress people like us, even though we're necessarily exercising our rights to speak freely on American soil. And that is the state of transnational repression around the world. And besides this sort of physical intimidation, physical harassment, we also see how China is attempting to spread their version of democracy and human rights around the world. For instance, China is still calling themselves the People's Republic of China. And with that, they often say they're practicing a sort of democracy and a sort of liberty, providing it to Chinese people inside the country and around the country. But of course, they twist their narrative to say that, you know, people like us are actually hindering their democratic development, and people like us are actually hindering the human rights of people who are supportive of the Chinese regime. Now, that is actually quite a dangerous development, because over, you know, the past decades, we can see that this sort of rhetoric and narrative twisting is actually what the CCP thrives in. That's their number one skill in getting to govern really this whole huge and mass country. And right now, with, you know, Chinese nationals around the world, even when they're physically not present in China, their minds are still being controlled by the Chinese regime through the internet, through social media. For example, if you speak to Chinese students who came here to the US to study, some of them would be asked to install, you know, apps on their phones or follow certain accounts on social media. And these social media pages actually write about American news in Chinese, and they also write in a certain rhetoric and language that actually seek to say China is the best governance model out there in the world, and that people who are studying here should understand that, you know, other countries are you know, not authorities, and other countries are nowhere near a model, and that they should all honor the Chinese party. So that is, you know, the kind of mind controlling around the world to all Chinese nationals and people of the Chinese heritage, even if they're physically present outside of China. So throughout the years, we can see the trend of that increasing around the world, and especially inside of Asia as well. So today I really, you know, I'm looking forward to this panel, because for me, I really need to ask, where's human rights right now, after 75 years of working together across the countries, across continents? Where's human rights when there are so many economic benefits and political alliance between dictators? Why are we not seeing, you know, human rights come into fruition yet? And even more so, we are seeing the deterioration of human rights. So that is why I think it's really up to us to work across, you know, organizations, to work across different pockets of the society, and to work across continents, because we're not only fighting for human rights for our own respective country or people, we're fighting for human rights as a world, and that's why we should come here today. And again, I really appreciate being here, and I look forward to the discussion later.
Thank you, Anna, and it's really David Tran. He is the coordinator for the Alliance for Vietnam's Democracy. He has been active in the community services for the last 40 years. Dr. Tran is a national facilitator for Asian Pacific Islander Institute for the Department of Health and Human Services. He was a recipient of several American Medical Association, AMA, Physician Recognition Awards, and the AMA Leadership Award. He was on the faculty for the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center. Please welcome Dr. Tran.
First, I want to thank the panelists for agreeing to be here today. I think that as one of the organizers of this event, I also want to appreciate our friend Courtney and also Devin, who's also on he's no longer at Counterpart, but we appreciate his leadership for us to have this event. We were ambitious in trying to organize this and trying to think that we could do this within an hour and 15 minutes. And I think the level of expertise and suffering and the experience, that knowledge that you see here with my fellow panelists, I think that we could fill the whole week. So I don't think I'm going to have much time. I just want to briefly summarize the situation in Vietnam. I look at my notes and compare this notes to maybe 30 years ago, and I don't see much difference. And we've been talking about this for years, but I have a duty to repeat it. But I think Vietnam still systematically suppresses basic civil and political rights. The government under the one-party rule of the Vietnamese Communist Party continued to severely restrict rights to freedom of speech, assembly, association, movement, and religions. We heard from Dalia and Gina talk about national security laws and interests. We have the same thing in Vietnam. We had a decree this year in August restricting NGO operating in Vietnam from doing anything against, quote, national interests, unquote. But no definition of these terms are provided in the decree, so you have it open to wide interpretation. And any groups deemed to violate these provisions will be shut down and will cease to exist. Authorities blocked access to sensitive political websites and social media pages, and pressure social media and telecommunications companies to remove or restrict content even remotely critical of the government and the ruling party. Critics of the government faced regular discrimination, harassment, restricted movement, arbitrary arrest and detention, and imprisonment after unfair trials. With religious groups that outside of government controlled institutions, groups such as the Cao Dai Hoa Hảo Christian and the Unified Buddhist Church of Vietnam face constant spying, harassment, and intimidation. And followers of these groups are subjected to public criticism, forced renunciation of faith, detention, interrogation, tortures, and imprisonment. Because of these and other violations, last November, the United States Department of State announced that Vietnam was placed on the special watch list for engaging or tolerating the severe violation of religious freedom. So I think, as my panelists have said, after 75 years, Vietnamese people don't have much to commemorate or celebrate. We still struggle with severe abuse of human rights. In October, we also faced with another travesty where Vietnam was elected to the United Nations, the Human Rights Council for the 2023-2025 term. This is the second time in the last 10 years that they've been elected. So thank you for being here. I know that we run in short time, so I'm giving this back to the moderator.
Thank you, Dr. Tran. It's fitting that on the 75th commemoration of the International Human Rights Day, that we continue to promote human rights, and especially the advancement of human rights and in the civic space to promote the resilient communities in Asia. So we have 2 questions for the panelists, and then we'll open up to the audience. So my first question goes to Dr. Arle. You are, all of you are the front line of this fight, and what is your vision for a sustainable civic space? Does it involve a middle class and free and fair elections?
Yeah, so thank you so much for that question. I think this particular question also relates to the age-old debate about democracy and development. When we talk of these particular concepts, I mean, there's always this question of which one should come first, whether we need to economically develop so that we can have the necessary conditions for democracy, or do we need to be democratic first so that we can facilitate economic growth? And this brings me back to your question about the role of the middle class. I think in Asia, the reality is much more complicated. So we have countries like South Korea, and Taiwan. And yes, I consider Taiwan as a country. So we have countries like this where the middle class, of course, which were a product of economic development, became very important actors.
I think in the future right now there are a few challenges that we have to counter. The first one is definitely the information war that we're seeing right now in a lot of cyberspaces, on the internet and media spaces. We do see more and more influence from the Chinese regime to attempt to change the narrative of how people should understand, for example, our movement, and how people should understand democracy in general. And just for example, during the Russian invasion of Ukraine, you do see the Chinese government attempting to frame it as Russia defending themselves, and that is very, very dangerous because for authoritarian regimes, for dictators, they're covering for each other, and they're also helping each other to create this alter narrative or a parallel universe where their side of dictators are actually the righteous ones, whereas we are the ones funded by whoever, like CIA operatives or color revolutions or something similar. So I think that is definitely the number one thing that we can work on together, which is to create and to enhance the true global narratives of what actually happened in our places, what the Chinese government is actually trying to do with economic coercion in different parts around the world. And thirdly, what is the price you would have to pay for that short-term economic relief that will eventually become, an endless debt and loan that you will have to pay the Chinese government back. So this is definitely, I think, the first thing that we can work on together. And the second thing is, I think right now, when I'm doing this sort of advocacy work, I often see advocacy comes in cycle. You always have the media cycle that one day they are interested in China, the other day they're interested in Hong Kong, the next day they're interested in other parts of the world. And I think it's really up to us that we can work together and build solidarity by sharing the stage and sharing that voice and that spotlight. Because right now, attention span of people are short. They may only have 5 minutes of their time every single day to read the news. And if every single day, you give them a new story, sometimes they don't really have the depth to understand, the common theme that is recurring and the common denominator between all of our movements. So I think it's important to create a comprehensive story, a narrative that really highlights the fact that dictators are working together and we are on the other side of the world and other side of the fight, trying to fight for the fundamental freedoms and human rights that we should all enjoy. So that is definitely the second part. But last but not least, I also think there are more ways the policy world can also consider putting policy and legislative tools together. So for example, in a lot of time when I do work with counterparts on the Hill or in the administration, I see that all the positions and offices are divided by countries and divided by regions. And sometimes, there are tools that have worked, for example, in the case of countering Russia, for example, that can actually be replicated to counter the Hong Kong government or the Chinese government. But this sort of conversation or this sort of resource of sharing is not happening yet. But there are actually a lot of ideas, that can be shared, around different movements, not only within Asia, but also within, the whole world. There are a lot of policy tools that are still unexplored. And I think it's up to our civil society partners, to work together to explore, creative and innovative ways to fight against the dictators through policy tools. So these are 3 things that I can think of, but I'm sure there are still a lot of, different ways we can work together that my fellow panelists